Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to Reading Museum and this virtual tour of Britain's Bayeux Tapestry. And it will look at the story and the vibrant images of this Victorian replica of the Bayeux Tapestry. This copy was made in 1886 by 35 women from the Leek Embroidery Society in Staffordshire in northern England. It took about a year to make and then went on a world tour before coming to Reading in 1895, where it was bought, donated to Reading Museum and has been on display ever since. This copy is as close as it could be to the original, uses the same natural dyes. Things like the blue comes from the plant woad, and it was designed to be as close to the original as possible, but there are two main differences. One are the blue borders above and below the tapestry. The bottom one has a really interesting signature from the lady who embroidered that piece. The other is that some of the nudity in the original tapestry has been covered up, and that's because the sketchings and engravings that the Victorian Albert Museum lent to the Leek Embroidery Society had already been altered, so this nudity wasn't included, because it would be wrong to show the naked form, especially to a group of Victorian ladies. The original tapestry, we think, was made about 10 years after the key scenes that it shows in the 1070s, probably on the orders of Bishop Odo of Bayeux, the younger half-brother of William the Conqueror, the Bishop of Bayeux and the Earl of Kent. And it's in Canterbury, in Kent, that we think the original tapestry was made, embroidered by specialist embroiderers working under the direction of monks. So, after the original was made, it eventually made its way to Bayeux in Normandy, in France, where it's been to this day. Let me introduce you to the three main characters of the story: King Edward the Confessor, as he became known, Harold Godwinson, the powerful Earl of Wessex, and William, Duke of Normandy. Now, William is a distant relative of Edward, but he's his most powerful and influential blood relative, and he feels that he should become the next King of England. And here the story starts. Now, Edward has chosen to send Harold on a diplomatic mission. He's sent him on these before, but here he's travelling to Normandy in northern France. Before travelling to Normandy, Harold goes on a hunt with his hounds. He's a famous hunter. You can see him here with a rather plump bird and these glorious moustaches and a very fashionable mullet that lots of the Anglo-Saxons have throughout the tapestry. And he travels to his local church in Bosham that is paid for before journeying across the English Channel to Normandy. And it's a very dangerous route at this point, and they are blown off course and they're captured just north of Normandy by Count Guy of Ponthieu, who's the real villain of the Bayeux Tapestry. And you can see Harold here pulling out a knife, and one of his servants is joining him to fight with Count Guy's men, but he realizes that he's not going to be able to defeat him. He's also forgotten that he's not actually wearing any trousers at this point, because he's had to get off his ship so quickly. Harold then came to Count Guy's court. You can see Count Guy here with this very fashionable Norman haircut where the back of his head has been shaved. Harold is at court, and his men are some of these in this group scene here. And if you look carefully, they've not got quite enough legs for the scene. This is a mistake in the original that's been deliberately copied in Reading's tapestry. And if you follow me, the scenes here have been switched round, so the order has changed. So what happened after Harold went to Guy's court was that William heard that Harold had been seized and that he could no longer offer him the throne of England. So here, William is with his messengers, hearing the news. He sends two of his best soldiers galloping with their hair flowing behind them after Count Guy, and here they arrive and they're talking to Count Guy, pointing furiously, and the back of their heads have been shaved as well. Harold comes to William's court as an honoured guest, but he's still a prisoner who wants to be released, taking his stance here like an actor on the stage, performing a monologue about why he should be free. The story takes a turn here with a scandal, probably a love affair between this wealthy woman called Elfgiva and this certain priest with a tonsure. There's been a lot of speculation as to who they were, possibly a veiled insult to one of the main characters. Elfgiva, though, was a common Anglo-Saxon name, and it's likely to have been a well-known story that's been lost. They're thought to be connected with these two nude figures here. These men are nude in the original, but here they've actually been covered up to preserve their modesty. The most famous is this little man here in pants. They're not the only characters whose story has been lost to time. Three men who may have been patrons and landowners of Bishop Odo are scattered through the tapestry. Turold, Woddard and Vital. Very little is known who they were, but they may have helped pay for the tapestry. And now, back to the main story. William is at war with his neighbour Conan of Brittany, and Harold, possibly against his wishes, has joined the fight. He's here shown as a hero, hauling two of William's soldiers from the quicksand. This might seem a bit strange, but painting him as a great warrior makes William's association with him even better. And you can see here, by contrast, Conan as a coward fleeing his castle, abseiling down the walls, before the Normans storm more of his strongholds, and finally he's shown here surrendering the keys of his castle, and William has his great victory. Then William and Harold went to Bayeux, and Harold is shown being given arms and armour. This is a knighting ceremony. He's coming under William's protection, and finally he's shown holding out his hands and swearing an oath on sacred relics. The Normans claim that this was the oath that Harold was acknowledging William as King Edward of England's heir, and that he would allow him to become the next King of England when Edward died. Harold was then free to come back to England. Now Harold, now he's given this oath, can never be King of England in the eyes of the Normans, is allowed to return home to England, where he finds an increasingly sick Edward on the throne, as you can see, with dark grey hair and beard. So the Bayeux Tapestry is so long, it's actually about 70 metres long, that we finished the first half and I'll take you through to the second half. So by the 5th of January 1066, Edward is dying, and he's on his deathbed here, touching fingers with Earl Harold Godwinson, his brother-in-law, and Harold took this to be a sign that he wanted him to be the next King of England. So the next day, in the morning, Edward was buried in Westminster Abbey, and Harold was crowned King of England that afternoon in a swift and surprising coronation. He was brother-in-law to the king, but never before had an Anglo-Saxon who was not in the royal family been crowned King of England, and Harold must have persuaded, bribed, and even threatened the leading nobles to offer him the throne, despite being the strongest candidate. Trouble was brewing. A great hairy star, as it was called, was seen in the sky early that year. We now know that this was Halley's Comet, seen every 75 years or so, but to many Anglo-Saxons it was a sign of impending doom. God might be judging their new king. These ghostly ships you can see beneath a worried-looking Harold may be a depiction of his nightmares of invasion. Despite Harold being a just king, not everyone in England was happy, and Harold may well have sworn an oath to make William King of England. And now God was showing his displeasure by sending the comet, calling for William to be king. So word reaches William that Harold has seized the English throne, and William is left with two choices. Either he lets Harold remain King of England, or it's war. And what he needs to do is build up an army, so he sends word all across northern England that anyone who will fight for William, Duke of Normandy, will be given land and money. But also, between Normandy and England is the English Channel. And there's no ferry or no Eurostar to take you across. What he needs is a great navy. And the Normans don't have a standing fleet, so what he has to do is build up his ships. And you can see him here with his younger brother, Bishop Odo of Bayeux, ordering ships to be built. Then craftsmen fashion the logs that have been chopped down, and you see master carpenters here with long beards to show their experience, caulking the vessels, getting them ready to take across the channel. And then in late September 1066, when William's troops are ready to sail, the wind is behind them, you see the armour, the mail, the weapons, all being taken onto the ships. And most importantly, you see a great casket of wine being taken as well, because wine was very important to the troops. There are no reliable records of how large William's army was, but we think it was between 5,000 and 15,000 soldiers, with blacksmiths, carpenters and servants as well. You can see the horses here, just poking their heads over the side of the longships. Now this is important because the Normans were famous cavalrymen. And so the 200 ships or so set sail. It was a dramatic crossing. Ships became scattered, and William in his flagship with a carved figure at the prow was alone. A few even ran aground and their crews were attacked by local Anglo-Saxons, but they did land together as a fighting force ready for battle. But just imagine what it must have been like as a horse on one of these ships. It would have been a stormy night, and it would have been a horrible situation to cross the channel. And now we come to the Normans' landing, where they storm on the beaches and they seize everything of value from the surrounding area before they, as you would do, have a feast. So we can see a couple of the Norman cooks here cooking a meal, and then while this man looks like he might be taking a selfie, he's actually baking a few cakes to go with the meal, and the chicken kebabs that the soldiers are having, using their shields as plate. And here we come to a scene very reminiscent of medieval views of the Last Supper. William being blessed at a feast by his half-brother, Bishop Odo of Bayeux, to show the justice in the invasion. William then has a council of war with his two half-brothers, Odo and his captain. We don't know what this story is, but it's another that may have been lost and understood at the time. The tapestry doesn't shy away from some of the horrors of war, and the Normans are shown burning down the house of a wealthy English woman fleeing with her child, the only child in the Bayeux Tapestry. You might be wondering why Harold hasn't mounted a defence of England, but that's because he's dealing with another issue. England has been invaded in the north, near York, and Harold has marched as quickly as he can to deal with this threat. Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway and the most fearsome Viking warrior chief in the world, had come to York. He also felt that he should be King of England, and he'd already defeated an English army sent against him. Harold Godwinson surprised Harald Hardrada at a place any Chelsea fan will know well, Stamford Bridge. Each side had about 5,000 to 7,000 men, and it was a bitter struggle, but eventually the Anglo-Saxons won and Harold Godwinson was victorious. A few days later, when his men were still resting, he heard that the Normans had invaded and he needed to come 300 miles south to face him. William had taken Hastings, and so Harold Godwinson needed to root him out. He marched as quickly as he could. If you were wealthy, you rode, but if you were a poorer soldier, you'd have to march all the way to the battlefield at a hill just above Hastings. Now, the soldiers would have worn armour like this on both sides, the Vikings, the Normans and the Anglo-Saxons, chainmail, the most cutting-edge technology of the time, and they would have worn helmets just like these. Battle is about to be joined. You can see here the wonderful detail that the embroiderers have made to show the horses changing from a walk up to a gallop as they engage with the Anglo-Saxons and their shield wall at the top of the hill. The Norman mounted knights dominate the Bayeux Tapestry. They're supported by a few archers as they engage with the Anglo-Saxons and their shield wall at the top of the hill, with soldiers using spears up to 7 feet long to repel the Norman cavalry. It was bitter fighting from 9 in the morning till about 5 in the evening. But eventually, part of the Norman army, a group of mercenaries, thought that William had been killed and they started to flee. And this led to calamity. A rout in the Norman lines where the Norman cavalry began to charge away from the battle. They thought that William was dead and that the cause was lost. So William pulled back his helmet and called to his troops that he was still alive and that with God's help they would be victorious. So here we come to the climax of the Battle of Hastings and the Bayeux Tapestry, the death of Harold Godwinson, King of England. He's either the man here with moustaches being cut down, struck down on the head from above, or he's the more famous image of him with an arrow in the eye. We can never be certain of Harold's fate, but his death marked the real end of the Battle of Hastings and defeat for the Anglo-Saxons. You can see his troops here continuing to fight on, his housecarls in mail, his professional soldiers, and the lighter feared the militia. But by sundown on the 14th of October 1066, Harold was dead, his army was defeated and scattered, and William was victorious. You can see here in the bottom borders one of his men stripping mail from a dead body, and you can see other ghostly figures strewn through the borders, while the Normans chase after the defeated Anglo-Saxons. And the tapestry then ends very abruptly, and the reason for this is the last scene is actually missing. The last scene would have shown William the Conqueror on his victorious coronation throne on Christmas Day 1066, the culmination of all his efforts in the Bayeux Tapestry. But this wasn't the end of the story for William. For the next 20 years, he continued to expand the Anglo-Saxon kingdom in England, and he continued to have to fight battles against incursions from Vikings, Welsh and Scottish leaders, and even rebellious Norman and Anglo-Saxon nobles. William the Conqueror was a very hard king, and he ruled with an iron fist. And the Battle of Hastings was when he gained the throne, but the Bayeux Tapestry commemorates his great victory. Thank you for taking part in this virtual tour of Britain's Bayeux Tapestry here at Reading Museum. Why not visit us or look on our online shop at our great Bayeux Tapestry themed gifts. Thank you and take care.